Hi,
I'm good.
Peter.
I'm good.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Good.
How is London?
It's good. I'm just outside of London here, Rachel. I'm 30 miles outside of London, but it's a beautiful blue sky day in the south of England.
Okay, I'm here in Nairobi and it's very, very
And
well.
how is Nairobi?
Yes, I'm in Nairobi. Have you been to Nairobi before?
No.
You
Is it
haven't.
beautiful?
It is. You should come on a safari someday. It's the only city that has a national park inside.
Yeah, I know.
Yes, you should
I'd
come.
love to come someday.
Yeah, it's not every day I get to interview Peter Drury. I'm a big fan, by the way.
That's very kind of you. It's very
Yes.
kind of you. I'm really flattered that you've got in contact, Rachel.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I am so happy that you took the time. I'm sure you are a busy man.
Well, it's nice once in a while to speak to people all over the world. I'm very lucky, man. I am busy, but I've certainly got time for you.
Oh, thank you so much. So first things first, I have so many questions. I don't even know like where to begin, but let's start with, is it easy being a commentator in 2020?
Um, Listen, Rachel, it's a very, very fortunate way of life. So anybody who complained and said it was difficult to be a commentator in 2020 needs to remind themselves of how lucky they are. People do much tougher things than I do. They do things that really matter in the world. They teach
Yes.
children, they heal the sick, they put out fires. All I'm doing is shouting footballers' names. it's it's of course, like every other job in the world, there are good days and there are bad days. There are days when you think you've done well and you're pleased, and there are days when you come away thinking I wasn't so good today. But the thing about my job is the worst that can happen is that for one day you make a fool of yourself by getting it wrong. Um, Nobody else suffers, and so I'm watching very good level sport and being paid for it. It would be silly of me to complain about that.
Okay, and which was the first game that you ever commentated on?
Oh, that's a tough one. It would have been a long time ago in local radio, possibly even before I joined a proper local radio station. I remember doing some early games in the third tier of English football at Bradford City and Huddersfield Town. I know it sounds silly. I couldn't tell you for certain what the first football commentary I ever did was, but it was somewhere around 1988, 89, something like that, maybe 1990.
Wow, that's very, very interesting. 1990 to now.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
well, yes. And here I am, still rabbiting on and getting away with it.
Okay, and it's very nice. People look up to you. People are looking up to you. Even my generation is looking up to what you do every single game. So when did the interest begin of commentate?
Well, when I was a small boy, I used to be fascinated by television and radio and commentators and so on. I loved sport, but I wasn't particularly gifted at sport. I was just like any other little boy in the playground. I dreamt a bit about football, but I wasn't good at it really. Um, and I always loved words, and it felt a natural thing to want to do. It wasn't a dream that I expected to fulfill. It was just one of those things I thought about. But when I graduated from university, I was briefly an accountant, a very, very poor one, and I decided to pursue it. And after a lot of rejection and disappointment and so on, I had some fortunate breaks along the way, and 30 years on, um, I'm still doing it. So that's a very lucky thing.
I read somewhere that you actually started commentating on your mother doing chores. Is this true?
It's absolutely true. I did. I used to commentate on everything. I used to commentate on myself doing chores and my brothers and my mum and my dad. I had a view from my bedroom window of a public park which was opposite, and my dad in the mornings used to go and buy his newspaper from a little shop that was on the other side of the park. And as he was walking home, I used to commentate to myself on him walking home, and I could see him along this path as if he was running the final lap of an Olympic race. And so when he came up to the gate, that was, like crossing the finishing line. So yeah, that sort of thing. And I, when my mother asked me to vacuum the house, I used to go up and down the rooms, commentating on myself in my head. Crazy stuff, really.
Okay, and let me just take you way back forward. Let's talk about the FA Cup. When you mentioned, when you were so emotional about how Aaron Ramsey was about to leave the Arsenal team, and this statement of yours really caught social media was abuzz. Everything was happening so fast, and the fans were, even some of the fans were crying. So you said that, let me quote, one day next autumn, when Aaron Ramsey wakes up in his bed in Turin and feels a bit lonely in a foreign land, he will warm himself with the memory in a sense of goodbyes to Arsenal of a goal against Spurs at home. But when you look at those words, you really have a way with words. People say that you use your words to actually, give people a point of view or a perspective where they shape the perception of the game. So how do you do it? How do you use these words to actually shape how people view football?
Well, the thing is, Rachel, I don't sort of set out to do that. I know it sounds silly, really, but I think it would be big-headed of me to say I had some sort of style, or I set out in some way to make an impact in that way. I just speak the language the way I speak the language, and it's perhaps not everybody likes it, but it's lovely that some people do like it. And I always say this when young people say, "How do I become a commentator or whatever?" I think the most important thing is just to be yourself, to be authentic, not to pretend to be someone else, not to put on a show that you think people might expect from you, but just to be the person you are. And for better or worse, the person I am is someone who likes using words, um, and and if they are positively received, then that's a lovely thing for me. But the point is, I'm just articulating football matches, and the reason people tune in is to watch the football match. And so all I am, the best thing I ever heard about commentators in general is that we are audio wallpaper. We're a little bit of the background. We are not the scene itself. Um, and so all you can hope is that people like the wallpaper.
Okay, and I just want to, ask you about the 2010 World Cup in South Africa. I'm sure you came to South Africa and you saw the beauty of Africa in itself. But let's talk about the game that, Shabalala scored for South Africa. That was a great commentary, and I'm sure that, being in an unfamiliar land, sometimes the names become difficult, or you're not used to the names. So how are you able even to mention these names? How do you identify the players in this case?
Well, I wouldn't claim to identify with the players. I think I always worry a bit about broadcasters who give the impression of thinking they're the players themselves. I don't think that is our job. What I seek to do is to admire and enjoy the players. And that World Cup was a very special World Cup because it was the first one in Africa. And that day when Shabalala scored his goal was a very, very special day. And anybody who has any feel for the world, never mind football, sport is just a wonderful thing that can make these things happen. Anybody who understands the world and its problems couldn't help but be moved that day. Walking into the ground in Johannesburg, where black and white people were arm in arm, and smiling and laughing, and the world felt for once, around all of its myriad problems and wars and arguments and divisions, the world for once felt united. And when this young boy from Soweto smashed in a goal in front of the whole world, that for me was a beautiful, beautiful moment, and if only we could bottle that moment and keep it and inject ourselves with it once a day, we might have fewer problems in the world. If we could see that, it was an equalizing moment. We were all the same for that moment in time, and we rejoiced in each other. And just for that split second, there was no division. Probably the only sad people in the world in that moment in time were Mexicans, because they were 1-0 down. And I don't hold that against them. They're allowed to support their country. So listen, that was when people say, what's your greatest memory? That's probably it, because I don't think even the goals in the World Cup final, I don't think any goal that I've witnessed or can even think of carries more global importance than that beautiful goal.
Okay, and I'm sure that, as a commentator, many people think it's easy and it's something that you can just wake up in the morning and do, but I'm sure that you have a lot of preparations to do. Kindly tell us about, when you're preparing to become a commentator, what do you do?
Yes, well, I mean, there is a process to go through for every match, which involves sometimes some very boring statistical research, player by player, team by team, the history of the game, the relevant statistics for each of maybe 25 players in each squad, and so on. And essentially, I always say, on average, every match that lasts 90 minutes is worth an 8-hour working day. That's an average. So sometimes, if they're two very familiar teams who you might have worked on more recently, it doesn't take quite so long, maybe never less than 4 or 5 hours. And sometimes if there are unfamiliar teams, or the game we've just been referring to, say the opening game of a World Cup, where there are all sorts of different nuances and new players to learn and different background, a completely different narrative, it can be 2 or 3 days work to be ready for a single game. So yeah, I mean, the actual broadcast of the game is the culmination. It's the last little 10% of the entire process. If you did just try to turn up and pick up the microphone and go, you'd very, very quickly be found out.
Indeed, indeed. And I just want to ask you, do you ever think that you could have described a certain game better? You could have said something else better for this goal?
Every week, Rachel, every week I have that sensation. Every time I'm at a match, almost every time, I can get into the car to drive home afterwards and feel some sort of regret. That sounds terribly negative, I know, but you think, oh, why didn't I think to say that? Why didn't I phrase that slightly differently? And indeed, why did I make that little mistake? Barely a game goes by without a small mistake or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 in it. Saying the wrong player's name, getting the referee's identity mixed up, just small things that perhaps most of the audience haven't even noticed, but which just, if you have professional pride, irritate you. So just as, the greatest footballers in the world are great, but within each football match, even Messi gives the ball away sometimes. Even Ronaldo shoots wide, and so you cannot beat yourself up for making a mistake. Mistakes are an inevitable part of being human. But yeah, in terms of expression and so on. It's amazing how often the best lines you come up with in the car park afterwards, and they're wasted there, unfortunately.
So, okay, so why football? Why not hockey? Why not cricket? Why football?
Oh, well, like so many children, I grew up loving football on the television and playing football and so on. I love a lot of sport. I love all sports to a greater or lesser extent. I'm a great fan of cricket, actually, but football, let's be honest, is the big global game. That's what seems to capture the world more than any other game, and it captured me. So I'm entirely unremarkable in that sense. I'm just one of gazillions who grew up following the game, and I'm just very lucky to be working in it.
And do you have a favorite team? I know that commentators are supposed to be neutral without bias, and they're supposed to have a perspective, a neutral perspective, like sitting on the edge. But do you have soft spots for some?
Well, yes, I do. I do, and the only reason I won't say it out loud is because of perception, not reality. So what I would say to you is that there would be a perception if I told you my team, which is quite a small one. It wouldn't offend anyone. They're not in danger of winning anything. But there is a perception that if and when I work on that team, I would favour them, which is absolutely wrong. And indeed, I have worked on them many, many times. And because people don't know, I've never been accused of any sort of bias or leaning towards them. But it's not helpful to make it too publicly known who that team are, because football fans, understandably, are very partisan, and they could perceive things based on their own reality, which aren't the actual reality. So I can assure football fans in Kenya and everywhere that when you are commentating on a game, you're commentating with your head. You know, when you're supporting your team, you're supporting it with your heart. And they're two very, very different mindsets. And when you turn up to, as I often have, to commentate on the team that you would otherwise be supporting, you move from one mindset into another, and the two simply don't overlap. You leave one persona behind and you go to work with another. And so even if you do know the team the commentator supports, I promise you that no commentator I know who you hear regularly on the television favours their team. They really don't, because you've got too much on. You're concentrating on getting the names right and articulating the game correctly. Support of your team just doesn't come into it.
And I read somewhere that you have worked with your co-commentator, Jim Berglin. Not every time he gets to become your co-commentator, but I heard that you worked with him since 1995, which is very, very impressive. Is this true?
Yes, on and off. We have, yeah. We worked together, first of all, when I and he worked for BBC Radio in this country. And yeah, those were his early days, because obviously he was a very accomplished footballer whose career was cut short because, sadly, of injury. You know, he was a title winner with Liverpool in the mid-1980s and went on to have some time at Leeds United as well. But sadly, injury caught up with him in his mid-20s. He could have become a much more famous player than he did become. But he reinvented himself as a broadcaster and has done extremely well. And we were together first with the BBC and then for years with ITV, the big commercial channel in the UK. And for the last decade or so with the Premier League, and we've worked together also on BT Sport in this country and so on. And he's become a very good friend and colleague. He'd be horrified to think that he's had to sit next to me for 25 years.
It's very, very impressive, very impressive. Not every day people get to work with others for more than 2 decades.
Yes, and more, yes.
Yes, so, but I'm sure he gets to enjoy the experience with you.
Well, I hope so. I hope so. I consider it a great privilege. I'm still someone who is in awe of people who've played top level sport. So to me, the privilege and pleasure is all mine. I work with people, Jim and Andy Townsend and many others who have played top level football, uh, international football, won major prizes. And every time I'm with them, I learn from them because they can teach me things about the game that I really wouldn't otherwise know.
Okay, and let's talk about the Roma and Barcelona game. This is a game that everyone asks you in every interview. Did you think that it would cause such a buzz, and everyone was talking about it when Roma defeated Barcelona, which was so unexpected? Did you think that it would make an impact because people are talking about it to date?
The short answer to your question is no, I didn't. It's an extraordinary thing that role, Rachel, in my professional life because I genuinely had no idea. I didn't see it coming. That evening, I was quite relaxed because Liverpool were playing Manchester City that evening in the Champions League, and in the UK, that was the much bigger game. Naturally, it was two English teams. Um, and so I just went to the Roma Barcelona game, intent on enjoying it. I was going to see Messi play. I was in the Olympic Stadium, Rome. What was not to like? It was a good evening, and it really didn't occur to me until Roma were within one goal of Barcelona that actually something quite remarkable might be about to happen here. Roma only needed to score once more, and this crazy thing was going to happen. And so it was only sort of 5 minutes before that goal when my mind started to tick a bit, and I thought, well, if they score again, this isn't just going to be an ordinary goal. But you can't really be ready for it to happen. And when the ball went in, I didn't know who'd scored because it was a big central defender who doesn't normally score, and I had to find some words to sort of cover for a couple of seconds, and it was Roma have risen from their ruins, I think, and that was just buying some time.
Yeah.
And then I found out who scored, and off I went on this slightly weird rant about a Greek in Rome.
So, it had a lot of sentiments there. It had history. People were very impressed by what you said that day.
Well, that's lovely, and I left the ground that night, the stadium, not knowing it had made any impact at all. I honestly didn't think about it. I'm not on Twitter. I don't do social media. I went to the bar and had a beer, and then somebody rang me to tell me that it had made an impact, and I must say my phone did keep ringing then. And honestly, I was bemused, but it was lovely. It was lovely. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't lovely. It was, and it continues to be. And I'm very glad it happened. And if there's a lesson to be had from it for all of us who broadcast, it is you never know when it's going to be your night. As I said, that night I was not, or my match. I'm never the main attraction. The football is the attraction, but my match was not the main attraction. Far from it. It was way down the list. And so, as I say, let that be a lesson to us all. When you start out a football match or whatever you're doing in your working day and think, I'd rather be doing what the other person's doing, just remember, you never know.
Amazing. So what are some of the challenges in commentating? Someone may experience a lot of challenges. I'm sure you have a lot of experience in the industry. What are some of the challenges that you've faced?
Well, the challenge is to be up for it every time, to understand that every game is a big game for somebody, to know that supporters are tuning in, parties and supporters, to follow their team, to want their team to win, and that they care, and that even neutral supporters want to enjoy the game. I think a commentator constantly has to remind himself or herself that they are nothing more than the accompaniment of the game. They are not the main attraction. It is always, hopefully, about adding to what is already there. To know your place, to understand that not everybody is going to love you all of the time. You know, it's a matter of taste, and sometimes these things can get personal. And you know, you can't be in my industry without an understanding that that is a part of it. Personally, I don't have a thick skin, so criticism does hurt me, but it's an inevitable part of the process. And you know, the challenge, as I always say, is to remember ultimately to enjoy it, because a lot of people are working in much more important areas of the world and on much more important things, and in some cases in much harder things, manual, hard labor, day by day. You know, mine's not a real job. So remember every day how lucky you are.
Okay, do female commentators exist? Because I looked up, I didn't find any. Do they exist? And if you know some, please mention to us.
Well, yes, they do. They do, increasingly so in this country. The sort of iconic BBC television program Match of the Day has increasingly used the likes of Vicky Sparks and Robin Cowan. Jackie Oatley was the breakthrough commentator on Match of the Day some years ago. She works elsewhere in sports broadcasting now. And yeah, there is an increasing platform for female commentators, and certainly for co-commentators, for experts. I work with a lady called Karen Carney, who's a former England women's international. Sue Smith has done a lot. Alex Scott, another former England ladies footballer, is very, very prominent in the sports media here now. So yes, the playing field, I wouldn't say it's a level playing field yet by any means. I wouldn't pretend that at all, but it is closer and closer to being a level playing field.
You mentioned that you worked as a sports journalist. Hello? You mentioned that you worked as a sports journalist. So how was the transition?
Hi, Rachel.
Yes, can you hear me? Yes, so you mentioned that you were a sports journalist. So how was the transition?
Yeah, I wouldn't really describe it as a transition, because in a sense I think I still am a sports journalist. Journalism manifests itself in many ways. Journalism in the old-fashioned sense, I don't know if it's old-fashioned, but people think of journalism as getting stories, making contacts, getting inside and behind and so on. I was frankly poor at that type of journalism. I don't think I ever broke a story in my life. In the short period that I was a journalist, I was fascinated by the sport itself, and that's still the case. People talk to me about transfer fees and the politics of football and so on, and truthfully, I find it a bit boring. I know it's important, you know, it's my shortcoming to think that way, but that doesn't really interest me. I'm just excited by the match, and so what I would say to you, another very good description someone once put in front of me for commentary. Commentary is a kind of instant journalism. It's an in the moment journalism. This is what's happening here and now and now and now and now and now and now. That's what commentary is. It's immediate journalism. It's not investigative. It's not groundbreaking, but it is telling the story. And journalism is essentially telling the story. So what I did back then, 30 years ago, I worked for a very well-known sports reporting agency for a couple of years at the start of my career, where out of which a lot of very high-level sports journalists have come, who have broken between them hundreds, thousands of stories, and are journalists in that sense, and I admire them. But I wasn't one of them. As I say, my type of journalism is what I do.
which when you were in journalism, which kind of stories did you work on? Did you do hard news stories, or did you do feature stories on sports?
Um, I wouldn't describe anything I did as hard news journalism. I wouldn't understand hard news if it came and smacked me in the face. I think I, I I was involved, I suppose, in transfer gossip and all of that sort of thing, transfer stories, um, and yes, did some sort of what you might call magazine journalism, um, background stuff. Um, but and I enjoyed writing. I enjoyed writing features and so on. I mean, this is a long time ago. This is 30 years ago. Um, I did enjoy writing features and so on. But as I say, what I didn't have was the the journalist's nose for a story. It didn't excite me particularly to be the first to know that a player had joined Liverpool from Manchester United or whatever. It excited me to go and watch him play for his new club, and that's still the way. But I want to say, I understand why it does excite people, because without question, there are millions of fans out there, no doubt, around you in Nairobi, who are hanging on social media for, tell me, who are Liverpool signing now? Who are Manchester United signing now? They want to know that. And there is a massive market for that. And there are some guys who are very, very good at getting those stories.
And do you think that the English Premier League is one of the most watched in the world, and a lot of people look up to the English Premier League when they want to compare football here at home? So do you think that Africa or Kenya or South Africa, Tanzania can be able to have amazing football?
Well, listen, Africa has amazing footballers. There's no question about that. And I suppose I don't know. I wouldn't want to speak for you or your country or your country's football fans. That's for you to say. What I would say is that we in the UK are blessed to have this very wealthy football league, which, because of its wealth, is able to attract the very best talent from all over the world. So I'm sure you take pride when Victor Wanyama comes and plays in the English Premier League. But equally, you probably feel some regret in the sense that it would be great if there were a showcase in your own country which enabled your players to become global stars whilst accessible to your people. That must be a real shame when you produce a world-class player that inevitably he's going to go to the English Premier League or the Bundesliga or La Liga in Spain or Serie A in Italy. A lot of African players, of course, also in France. You know, as I say, I wouldn't want to tell you what you should think about that. But I can only imagine that you are thrilled when you see them on television, your people, but there must be a small part of you thinking, oh, what a shame our local fans can't see him play.
Indeed, this is very, very true. Sometimes you look at Victor Wanyama and you're always like, Victor Wanyama is on TV, and it's very patriotic. Speaking of being patriotic, you're an Englishman, right? And
Yes.
sometimes England gets to play, against other football teams. How do you ensure that you are not biased and talk about both teams in a neutral perspective, taking a neutral point of view?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because I spoke to you a little while ago about supporting your club and how you switch that off when you're commentating on them. Clearly, there's no hiding, and I wouldn't want to hide from the fact that I am an Englishman. And what would thrill me would be England winning the World Cup, which hasn't happened in my lifetime. But it's the dynamic of commentating on your national team is, I think, a little bit different, because I think people would be surprised. In fact, they would find it a little bit inauthentic if I didn't obviously prefer England to win. So there's a small percentage which I think allows for that, but equally, you're quite right. In the articulation of the game, you have to be very careful not to manifest that too much. And so, for instance, in the last World Cup, when England did reach the semi-final and played Croatia, I had to be very careful to be, and it wasn't hard, to be as excited about a Croatian goal as an English goal. And I hope I managed that, because if there were Croatian viewers out there, they were entitled to get the full whack when Croatia scored their goal and knocked England out of the World Cup. So that's just the way it is. It's about a discipline. And sadly, because of that game against Croatia, I never got to see England in a World Cup final. So I still don't know how it would feel to say those wonderful words. England have won the World Cup, but if I ever got the chance, God willing, to say them, only then would I find out how my heart and my head would deal with it.
Okay, and commentating is something that is accompanied by a lot of traveling. Is this something that you enjoy?
Rachel, I love traveling. I really do, and it's one of the great thrills of the job that I have been able to travel. South Africa, we've already mentioned that the World Cup in 2002 in Asia, Japan, and Korea, another great experience, and I've been lucky enough to go to all of the great stadia in Europe, which is fantastic. And that's why I feel a little bit of sadness about the upcoming season, because I think travel, understandably, is going to be curtailed to a large degree. And I think there's a high likelihood, I don't know, but I think there's a high likelihood that rather than doing European football matches at the venues, we're going to be sat in little booths in London, which isn't quite the same. But obviously there are more important things than me enjoying traveling. But yeah, I still, like a little boy, I'm still thrilled when I get on board an airplane.
And are there any English courses? Oh, okay, English courses that teach about commentating, or do you just have to study journalism in general?
As far as I'm aware, there are no specific courses. There are lots of sports journalism courses, some of which may have specialisms and do have specialisms in broadcasting. I know of people, and I'm one of them, who like to help young people if they want to get on in commentary. But it's a peculiar thing, because it's one of those things that you only learn to do by doing it. And so the thing to do if you want to learn how to do it is actually practice. And I know that can make people feel very inhibited and slightly embarrassed. But recording yourself in front of the television, commentating, is a good thing, and to be self-critical and to learn, and if you can make contacts to ask people to critique for you and suggest and coach and learn, is the way. But increasingly, I think there is a realization that it's a big enough industry that perhaps there should be formal training courses, and I wouldn't be surprised if they were up and running before too long.
Okay, and I just want to ask you about, like commentating in its own way is a very demanding job, I'm sure. And sometimes you may have maybe family events, maybe on Saturday, because I'm sure you get to commentate mostly on weekends. How are you able to balance work life and family life? How do you make it work?
Well, it's become a way of life, and so I'm fortunate. I've been married to my wife for 30 years, and I was starting out in, actually, I met her at university, so I wasn't even in sports journalism when we met. But we've grown into middle age together, and she understands what I do, and we have never had weekends like other people have weekends. We just haven't. You know, when people say, let's meet on a Saturday, we say, I won't be there. And in the early part of my career, I missed friends' weddings and all of those things because that's what I had to do to get on. And to some extent, I regret that because you can never get that back, but not very much because I've been so lucky to have all these years doing what I love doing. Sometimes it's exasperating for my wife because we have to say no to invitations and things like that. But we've found a way, and we've got lots of good friends. And if I stopped doing it now and I was around the house at weekends, I think she'd want to kick me out.
A lot of people argue that commentating is for the chosen ones. I don't know whether in your country they argue that way, but a lot of people have complained that it is very hard to get into the field. Was it easy for you to get into the field?
No, not at all. I don't think that has changed at all, Rachel. I think that has always been to get into the field. Long before emails and so on, and you had to write letters of application and so on and wait for them to come back in the post. I had by my bedside in my parents' house, I had a great pile of letters of rejection saying, sorry, no, sorry, no, sorry, no, because I didn't have the right qualifications or experience or anything for the jobs I was applying for. And I'm sure young people right now suffer exactly the same problem. The point is, it's a fantastic profession to be in, which makes it a very competitive profession to be in. Lots of people want to do it, and I'm sure there are millions of people out there who could do a really good job and sit there thinking I could do a better job than him. And the only reason they can't get to do it is because they don't get the lucky break that lets them in. And that's, I'm afraid, is just how it is. And I don't know what can be done about it. There aren't enough jobs to go around. And those of us who are lucky enough to have them, get them jealously, because I'm not stupid. I understand that there are other people out there who could do what I do, and I'm just lucky. And so I would say to people, if you really, really want it, that pile of letters of rejection, or in your case, piles of emails saying no, 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 use them as motivation and keep on trying.
And when you look at commentating since you started, I'm sure it has changed a lot. A lot has changed. But we're also looking at commentating in the future. So when you look at commentating, what changes do you expect to see, say, in perhaps 20 years from now, or even 30 years from now?
Gosh, well, I'm glad to say that won't be my problem, because I think I'm more or less past changing now. So once I get outdated, they'll kick me off and it'll be someone else's turn. And so that's okay. That's the natural way of things. Truth is, I don't know. My worry for our industry is that technology is so clever now. It may not be too long before, instead of employing a commentator, television companies can just use software that will tell you the name of the player who's got the ball and shout goal when the ball goes in the net, which will be a lot cheaper and won't make mistakes, and all of that sort of thing. I worry that might happen. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how it develops. For me, sport is about humans, and we're, sport in general is having this debate at the moment, VAR in football and technology and so on, which is making it or trying to make it surgically correct, absolutely right. And I think it possibly is in danger of taking some of the humanity out of it. And broadcasting is another area where you could, if you chose to, take the humanity out of it to make it absolutely spot on and correct. Would it be better? Who knows? But if you think of how much the world has changed in the last 20 years, so fast, it's, I dare not predict how it's going to change in the next 20 years.
Speaking of VAR, what do you think about VAR?
Well, it's become one of our great dilemmas, hasn't it? And I don't know where to go with it really. We all have to admit that before VAR came in, there were raging arguments and rows about injustices around football matches, goals that shouldn't have been, goals that should have been, offsides that weren't and were, free kicks, penalties that should and shouldn't have been given. And so there was clamour in the television age to say, this is ridiculous. We can all see that the referee's got this wrong. The only person who can't is the referee himself. And it made sense. It made absolute sense to say, well, look, why not have somebody looking at the television who can get it right? And now we're getting it right more often. We're still not satisfied because these marginal decisions, which VAR is unearthing, seem to irritate as much as they please. So, for instance, in the Manchester United game on Saturday evening, Crystal Palace get to take their penalty a second time because David De Gea has his foot a centimetre off the line. Now, 2 years ago, that penalty would not have been retaken. So what's right? Well, David De Gea did have his foot off the line. So it's the correct decision to have the penalty taken again. But you understand why people who are of the persuasion that says sport's not precise. It's about humans and frailty and imprecision and so on. Why those people find that unsatisfactory. And I'm not sure how we progress from here. I think we've got to learn to accept that having invited VAR into our lives, we've got to allow it to stay and to accept now that certainly at the top level of football, we are going to be governed by very straight lines. And either you're the right side of the line or you're the wrong side of the line.
Finally, I'm sure COVID-19 has brought a lot of, anxiety and has frustrated a lot of people. And, the ban on social gatherings as well has not been quite the cup of tea for a lot of English fans and all over the world. So what are some of the challenges that people have faced in the commentating industry with regards to COVID-19 coming along?
Rachel, I would have to preface my answer here by saying that the problems we have as commentators in the pandemic are as nothing compared to real problems. What we do does not matter. People have been very ill, people have died, people have lost their relatives, people's lives have been spoiled by this horrible thing which is affecting the whole world. So I have to start from that. And now I'll answer your question in context. What it has taken away from the English football is its famous atmosphere, its partisanship, its sense of routine, its rhythm, its people turning up for games and creating a feel which we love, which we got used to. Honestly, I every time I walk into a football ground, I think, how much better this would be if there were 40,000 other people here. Because at the moment we're slightly, and don't get me wrong, for all the right reasons, it's great that we've got football back on and that it is at least happening and it's a television event of some sort. But it's just not the same. We're slightly pretending. We're pretending. It's like, it's like going to the theatre, going into a theatre and seeing a play performed in front of nobody. There's just not that same buzz around each game. I must say, I think the players and the coaches and so on are doing really well because they are utterly motivated. The football itself at the start of this season has been captivating, but it won't really feel proper again until this horrendous thing goes away and we can resume our lives in a normal way. But this is all within the context of sport, and I'll finish the answer as I began it by absolutely reiterating, we're the lucky ones. At least we are still working. Millions of people are not still working. At least we've got some football to enjoy. Millions of people, aren't able to indulge their passions at the moment. So we are very, very lucky people. And it's worth reminding ourselves of that when we wake up in the morning and start complaining.
I love that answer. Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you. I appreciate the fact that I'm hosting you on this show.
Rachel, it's been a real joy to speak to you. Thank you so much, and thank you to all the football fans in Kenya. You need to write that down for me.
Do you know some Swahili?
No. I wish. No, I don't.
It's a very easy language that is accompanied by syllables, so I think it won't be as hard.
Well, listen, perhaps I should implore you to teach me.
Absolutely.
Thank you for the joy of the conversation. It's so lovely to connect with you. It's so lovely to feel the warmth of football people in your wonderful country. I'd love to come and see you one day. I really would.
When you come, just tell me.
Well, God willing, the world will heal itself soon, and we'll all be able to travel again and meet each other in the flesh. So, okay. Good luck, everybody, and thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.